This week, the Antiques Roadshow has come to West Sussex. 31 miles south of London, in well-wooded country on the way to Brighton, the buildings of Crawley suddenly emerge from an area of cleared forest, all built since 1945, when it was designated as one of the Attlee government's new towns, and it became part of the revolution in town planning. The transformation was dramatic and changed the whole nature of Crawley, which in the 1930s had been a small and rather congested bottleneck between London and the south coast. Such was the pressure on the town that it became one of the first places in Britain to benefit from a then new concept in road design. It was called the bypass. The history of British towns and their pubs are often closely interwoven, and that's certainly true of Crawley and the George. In the early 19th century, when Brighton was rapidly developing as a fashionable watering hole for London society, the George was a convenient overnight stopping-off place. Yes, the Regency bucks stopped here. Whether 19th century stagecoaches or 20th century international airliners, transport has always played an important part in Crawley's development, with Gatwick only 5 miles away, providing thousands of jobs for local people.
The opening of this airport at Gatwick this morning is quite an occasion in the world of civil aviation, because this is the first airport in the world to combine air and mainline rail travel and road transport all together in one place.
Our home for the day is the Hall Theatre, and as we open our doors, of course, we've no idea what to expect. Let's find out now as we join our experts with the people of Crawley.
This is one of the earliest chests of drawers I've seen for a long time. Family history, do you have any?
Not that I know of, but we bought it before we were married, and I was married a very long time ago.
Its date is about 1640 to 1650. It is actually most likely to come before our Civil War, which I mean is a long time ago. And during the first 40 years of the 17th century was when we began to develop manufacturing furniture with drawers and moving parts, rather than just a box with a lift-up lid. The interesting thing is, when you first look at it, apart from this top rail, there is no dividing rail between the drawers. The other thing that I like about this chest is that it's got some bracket feet, and the bracket feet do not belong. They were put on in about 1740, 100 years after the chest was made, and yet 200 years old in their own right, which I think is, you know, just amazing. The other thing is, this little narrow top, very shallow, very thin, fine top, the most wonderful colour throughout. But then, and this is the bit that makes it for me, is the back. Those 3 planks are priceless, aren't they? Nobody could create those today. You couldn't get a piece of oak and cut it today and make it look like that. Absolutely lovely. And here you can see where the back is chamfered off and slipped into a groove. That's how the whole panelling was constructed. No glue at all in this, absolutely none. And after 350 years, and it's still used as a chest of drawers. Amazing. So there, lots of things of interest about it. Fascinating piece of history, and I love it dearly.
So do I.
And you do use it all the time as a chest?
Yes, I do.
That's
it's my chest of drawers.
It is not a priceless piece of furniture by any means. I would have thought in today's market to a collector, given that it has later feet, not the original, and some later handles, still a piece you should insure for about £2,500.
All right. The insurance will have to go up.
It will indeed.
My father used to go to auctions, and he brought back a number of things, and then one day he brought these into the house, and my mother wasn't all that keen on them, but I loved them, and if I ever got into trouble, I used to sit and play with his bottom.
Rub his bottom, that's why it's so polished.
Bottom.
It's funny with bronzes, people always go for the bottom. It's
Yeah.
the most extraordinary thing. I think they're wonderful and splendid things. I should say they're bronze, they're purely decorative. The detailing of them is excellent. They're very well made indeed. The modelling on the seahorse is very sharp, very precise, as is this very nice panel of marine motifs going round it. Had you been able to go back to 1851 and walk around the Great Exhibition, I'm sure you would have found examples of work like this, reflecting that fascination with bringing to life again a style of the past that had been buried in public taste. Where were they made? Italy is a possibility. I would like to think they were actually English. because they're also quite close to an 18th century style by John Flaxman, who designed a very similar piece for Wedgwood made in black basalt. Now, do you know what your father paid for them?
I haven't got any idea at all.
Was it a bargain,
It wouldn't have been a lot of money because he didn't have a lot of money.
These sort of pieces are now increasingly becoming appreciated. I would not be surprised to find these fetching at auction something between £2,500 and £3,500.
I didn't think it was that much.
You didn't think that was good?
There seems to have been a complete proliferation of different styles of watch keys in the early part of the 19th century. And these ones are known as crank keys. Now this one, this is called a crank key because you can actually wind it. So when you put it into the watch, effectively, wind it up like that. The reason it has two pipes, one there and one there, is one will be for the watch and one may be for the hands or for the regulator.
Oh, no, that's something I didn't
But
know.
if you notice, this has got quite a lot of wear in it. By the way, it's unusual with the Masonic emblems on it, on both sides. And this one, this could even be about 1730, that one. And this one again, round about 1750, something like that, 1760. So those are the oldest keys. Then a cornelian key. That's possibly gold, that one. Solid gold. A whistle. Actually works. And, I don't know, a rose, rather elaborate rose pattern.
Yes.
Queen Victoria's Jubilee. Probably made to, what, 1887, made to celebrate it. But again, you see how late they were still running and making elaborate keys. Yes. And finally, this, which is really what most of these keys would at one time have been worn on. You've got the key on the end, the fob, little chain, it would have been worn in the waistcoat. Can you find them anymore?
Very few. They seem to, this last 3 years, they definitely seem to be drying up.
And how long ago did you start?
Nearly 25 years ago.
Well, there's 30 here, and at a quick glance, I would say it's well over £1,000. How many have you got in all?
400, approximately.
Well, I have to go through the rest. That's not bad.
This is known as a Bowie knife after the inventor of it, Colonel James Bowie, who died at the Alamo. You've probably seen the film with John Wayne.
Yeah.
And this is made for the American market by Rogers of Sheffield, and is very typical of knives that were made from about 1850 to well into the 20th century. It's a very nice quality piece, and it's in very, very fine condition and complete with its leather sheath. For a knife like this, you are going to be looking to pay something like £400 to £500 at auction.
400 to 500?
Yes.
That's amazing, eh?
Well, they have come on in leaps and bounds over the last sort of 10 years. And
the thing is it old?
Most certainly. It's about 1870, something like that.
1870, I see.
Yes,
Fair enough.
yes, certainly.
Oh, that's good news. 400 quid. Amazing.
Moving on to this next one. This is a very rare knife called a Baldock spear knife that was made by Dixons of Sheffield for Walter Locke and Company of Calcutta in India. And the idea of it was that it was a good basic knife that you could use either as a camp tool or as a weapon. It's got a saw along the back there that you could cut firewood or bone with. But I think most interestingly, that socket is hollow, and you could actually stick a piece of wood in there and use it as a spear.
That is why I hung on to it, because it's unusual, isn't it?
It is highly unusual.
Yeah.
I think in the 20-so years that I've been in the business, I've seen 3 of them. And again, the valuation for that is somewhere in the same region as that, around about £400, perhaps even £500 to the right collector, because it's got this very nice sheath with it, and quite often the sheaths don't survive with them.
Jolly good.
The most interesting of the 3 is this, which on sort of first impressions doesn't actually look like a knife. It almost looks like a bobbin out of a linen mill or something like that. And it's a Scandinavian design, and it's called a barrel knife. And to use it, you have to pull that out of the end and flick the blade round like that so it locks, and then it sticks back into the handle like that to provide a very large knife. Now, this is the largest one I have ever seen. It's too big for a hunting knife. It may well have some sort of agricultural use, or it could well be that it's a large tradesman's sample. And I'm going to value it at somewhere around about £500, simply for the size of it and the rarity of it.
Well, that's really pleased me. I mean, you know, the price you put on them.
Thanks very much for bringing them.
This is one of the most bizarre jugs I've seen in years. Do you have any background to it?
Well, it was presented to my great-grandfather as a christening present for my mother because he was head gardener for the Doulton family. The story says that there was two made and Doulton kept one for a museum or whatever. And
well, they do tend to keep one of everything.
And then they gave the other one to my great-grandfather.
Right. I would, I mean, a natural skeptic, me, but that story I think is feasible. What one could do is to check with the Doulton factory, and they've still got their museum, send them a photograph and say, do they have a copy of this? And they may have even documentary evidence there about it.
It would be interesting to find out.
It would be fascinating. Yeah. This is very much a collectible object. We've got a tiny little chip on the spout here, but it's minor. And rarities like this would be very popular with Doulton collectors, particularly in America. My guess is that this would fetch somewhere around £300 to £400. So, jolly nice object.
It's a very intriguing object, this. Partly because I can tell you what date it is, and we can see what it's all about. But there's one great difficulty to valuing it, is that I'm not quite sure what material the painting is on. So do you mind if we take it out and have a look?
Yes, go ahead. Have to know myself.
Now, I had hoped, I must say, I had hoped that it was going to be on porcelain, but it appears to be glass. It is glass. The date, quite straightforward, about 1810. Where it was done, most probably Paris. And one has to realize that when you're painting on glass or on china, it's much more complicated than painting on canvas, because the color you put on isn't the color you see.
Yeah.
By the time you find it, it comes out a different color. So these enamel colors are really quite difficult to manage. So technically, it's much more complicated to do this than it is to paint in oil colors on a canvas. Had this been perfect, I think we would have been looking at nearly £1,000. But I'm afraid that with these chips we've discovered when taken out of the frame do reduce the value. I still think probably looking at £300 or £400.
I see, yes.
It goes back quite a few years, but how long I do not know. But it's come down now to myself and my wife, and we rather like it.
And of course you know who it's by, because
I do, yes.
It says here, right. Yeah. No, it is indeed by John Callow, a fairly well-known 19th century watercolor painter. He's born in 1822, and he's a particularly fine draftsman, and I think if you look carefully you can see the fantastic detail. And take the ship here in the foreground, and you look at all the lovely detail, the rigging and the little figures here, and it's very well executed. I love this rather wispy sky, which reminds one slightly of Turner. It's a little bit discoloured, but you would expect that.
I was going to ask that. Are these the original colours?
Well, I think that they're pretty strong, and I would say that perhaps the paper on which it was painted is slightly discoloured, but I think on the whole the colours have really held fast. Have you ever thought about what it might be worth at all?
I seem to recall some years ago we had it valued, and just some time ago it was estimated around about £800 or £900 then.
Yes. Well, I think I must say, I think it's worth more than that. I mean, if I was you, I'd be inclined to insure it for £3,000 or £3,500, actually.
And while on the subject of pictures, I thought I should just bring you up to date on this painting, which you may remember we discovered when we were in Suffolk. Stephen Somerville thought that there was just about a 10% chance that it could be a constable. Well, I'm afraid that it's not actually by Constable, but by an unknown contemporary of his. And the one consolation for the owner is that since we've had it, we've taken it away, given it a light cleaning and a varnishing. But it's still a very decorative picture, would look fine on any wall, and the value is between £1,000 and £1,500.
What we have here is a very nice example of a West Country harvest jug.
Oh, yes.
Made probably in the early part of the 19th century, difficult to be precise, 1830 to 50 period. Yeah. And made probably in the potteries that in those days were very prolific in the North Devon coastal area, Barnstable, Bideford, a great centre of pottery making, in fact since the Roman period. And One of the things they specialised in fact, the most characteristic Bideford piece is the harvest jug, made out of the ordinary red earthenware, which was characteristic of the region, decorated with a coating of cream slip, and then that would be carved back, leaving the design in the lighter colour, with all the lines drawn on it. And again, this very nice neoclassical repeating frieze board around the base. One of the details I like particularly, I don't know if you enjoy it, is the way this handle has been finished off. You can see the potter has just twisted the strip of clay round and round and round just to finish it off, jammed it on, nice thumb piece there. A beautiful piece of country pottery in the most traditional sense. I suppose one has to think of it in, you know, as quite a valuable piece as well. You know, you may not have thought of that.
No,
it's
just
a standard family
no,
heirloom.
that's right.
But a jug of this quality would certainly fetch, I would think, £200 to £400 as a very rare example of that type of country pottery.
How many do you have?
Well, I did have 10 because there was a set of 12, but 2 were broken during the war,
Right.
so that left us 10. But when my mother died, I split and gave my brother 5, and I kept 5.
That's very generous of you. They're actually beautiful dishes.
Yeah, I know. I'm very sorry now.
Well, they're a little older than that. These are produced in the 1820s, and they're of a particular type of body. You've actually got it on the back of these dishes. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, on this one here, for example, it's got Chamberlain's Regent China. Chamberlain's was a Worcester manufacturer who at this time produced this incredibly expensive body, and it was so costly to do it virtually bankrupted the factory. And so you've got really quite rare items, and you can see that the degree of finish that has been given them, the gilding around the rim here, and the meticulous attention to detail on these wonderful botanical subjects. These are all hand painted. Yeah. We've got, for example, these two, which is ivy-leaved, it says it on the back, ivy-leaved geranium. I'm not a botanist, so I don't really know half these things. And on this one here is another version of geranium. It's spear-leaved geranium. They're very beautiful.
They are, yes.
Each of these plates will probably realise, I actually think, maybe £200 or £300. I could be even on the pessimistic side, I don't know.
Yeah.
But they are absolutely, truly wonderful objects.
Yeah, I think they're beautiful.
Yes.
Well, now to our new competition, which we rather thought that you would enjoy. It's in 3 parts. The winner will receive a voucher to the value of £2,500, and the 3 runners-up vouchers for £500, which they can then spend on antiques of their choice. Now, the subject of this 3-part competition is tea, and each week I'll be joined by one of our experts who will be talking about antiques particularly associated with this great British tradition, and also some clues as to the correct answers. Well, this week I'm joined by Ian Pickford with a collection of teaspoons. Familiar, of course, but tell us a bit about them, Ian.
Well, teaspoons are first found at the end of the 17th century. And by the mid-18th century, you get this fascinating group of teaspoons, which are generally described either as fancy backs or picture backs. Curious enough, teaspoons were actually smaller than coffee spoons in the 18th century because, of course, you had the small tea bowl and the large coffee can. But found with the teaspoon is this, which we believe was the forerunner of the tea caddy spoon. There are many people who will tell you that they were used with the pierce bowl, for skimming the leaves off the top of a cup of tea. Well, you can imagine some rather elegant 18th century lady spending 5 minutes skimming leaves. To me, it doesn't make sense. Sure. What does make sense is to take the tea out of the caddy with us. Large leaves, lots of dust. We just give that a tap, the dust would fall through. The tea then into the pot, the very small teapots of that period. And of course, when you started to pour, because the leaves were so large, they promptly blocked up the inside of the spout. So with a spike, you would clear the inside of the spout. This particular one dates from about 1720.
Ian, thank you very much. And so to our question, what is this particular type of spoon called? Now, in order to enter the competition, you'll have to get all 3 answers right. I'll be giving you another question in the programme next week and the final question in a fortnight's time, when I'll also give you more details on how to enter the competition. In the meantime, back now to our experts and the people of Crawley.
I'm absolutely certain that this engraving and the glass were all made at one go.
Oh, really?
the colour of the engraving is exactly the same colour as the glass, and quite often you get copies where the letters are all terribly tidy. And here, they're not. There are nice variations of proportion, and they're not terribly organised. People trying to imitate this get it much too regular. So this has got a lovely freehand feeling about it, which makes me completely confident that this is absolutely of that date. There's another very nice thing we can see here. On an old glass, the only bit that touches the ground is the outside rim. Right. Really good 18th century glass comes like this, straight down onto the table on a sharp edge. This one is an 18th century glass, but I have a slight doubt. It's not a major doubt, but a slight doubt about it. The glass is what's called a baluster wine glass. It was probably made between 1730 and 1740. Now, this engraving, which is also wheel engraving, like on that one, is 18th century. But I just have a slight reservation as to whether the engraving is contemporary with the glass. It's a very minor reservation. But again, we have the same phenomenon here, that the foot rim, edge of the foot rim, comes absolutely, only the outside edge touches the ground. Now this glass is of the same sort of period, but it's a foreigner. They did make glasses with colour twist stems in England, but this one is not an English glass. Right. This is from the Low Countries, from Flanders, and there's one way you can tell that quite easily, and that's this, I hope. That rings. This will not ring. This has no ring in it at all. There's a lot of soda in this, and this is a flint or lead glass. And the flint or lead glass will always ring. Did you acquire it yourself? Or did you...
Yes, I did, yes, yeah.
Did you pay a lot for it?
About 500.
Well, I think you did very well then, because I think that's worth 12 to 1,500 pounds. I mean, it is a very, very nice glass indeed. I think this is 500 to 600 pounds. Might, in my mind, be worth more if it was clean. It had no engraving, but that's me. This one, it's not because it's foreign or anything, and we're being British, it isn't nearly as valuable an object. I mean, it's 40 or 50 pounds. But I still think this one, also with its nice personality, it's a very nice object, and I think a thing of beauty.
Yes.
My mother married in 1919, and it was given to her shortly afterwards, I don't know quite how long afterwards, by a former employer of hers. And I think there was a little bit of a fondness between this employer and my mother.
What a nice story.
Yes.
Well, just rarely these days, do I find what I would call a little gem. And this is a little piece of furniture which was made between 1795 and 1810, not much later, and certainly no earlier. And it is in its original, untouched condition throughout, except that inside these doors, it would not have had glass, probably had pleated silk rather than glass.
Oh, yes,
And apart from that, there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. It is a perfect little Regency chiffonier, is its correct term. It's made of rosewood, it has brass stringing, the colour is golden, it's lovely, and the brasswork has all the original mercurial gilt finish to it. And the design is very Chinese-inspired. Do you see a sort of Chinese look to it?
Yes.
Sort of like Chinese fencing?
Yes, yes.
And this would be described as being in the style of the Brighton Pavilion. And it is that quality, and it is absolutely wonderful. And originally, it had a pair.
Oh, okay.
So these were always made in pairs, usually placed in alcoves or in passages, either side of either a fireplace or another piece of furniture, an important piece of furniture.
Yeah. Is it English?
Yes, it is. Oh, most certainly. And made by one of the leading manufacturers of the time. If this were to come on the market, it would probably be sold for between £12,000 and £15,000.
Oh, I never dreamt. Not that price.
My father collected them extensively through most of his life, and he passed them on to Mum now that he's gone, and we're still learning about what they are and where they're from, really.
Now, what we've got here, can you see that it's set with wood in the background, and again, just underneath, set with wood there. And the scene, it's an oak tree, and there are soldiers underneath on horseback.
Yeah.
And right in the middle there is the future King Charles II, when he hid in the Boscobel Oak.
The Royal Oak.
That's it, absolutely. A date of this one, especially with these sorts of mouldings, that's got to be, I would have said, about 1720. Early part of the 18th century. They're very rarely marked. I don't suppose, no, can't see a sign of a mark. Have you any ideas of values?
I wouldn't even be able to hazard a guess.
Right.
Quite.
I would reckon, as it's one of the more unusual Boscobel ones, somewhere around £2,000–3,000.
Not sure quite what to say. I mean, these are little things, but they seem to be worth...
You've got more?
More than money,
You've got more. Now, that is marvellous. Now, what we should find in there, yes, there we are, is that pierced grill. Do you know what it is?
Snuff? Scent?
Close. It's, in fact, a vinaigrette. And there should be a little sponge underneath here. Ah, no, there shouldn't be petals underneath there.
Right.
Who put the petals in?
I think that could be Mother.
Mother, right. But there should actually be a sponge inside there, and the sponge will be soaked in aromatic. So your idea of perfume, absolutely right.
Yeah.
Nathaniel Mills is the maker, lovely maker to find. Gosh, value on that. Mid-19th century, of course, the date of it. I think you'd have to insure that one for, what, about £1,500?
For a little thing like that?
For a little thing like that, absolutely.
I was going to put its date at 1895. I think that was probably when it was made.
Yes.
I don't think there's a mark on it. There aren't usually marks by this maker on these dolls, purely because it's rather an unusual doll, and you know why it's unusual.
Yes.
This is the laughing face, and then this should turn. It's a bit loose, and it's not turning, but I have to turn it by hand. And then we have the crying face with a moulded tear, which is wonderful, because if you turn it again, it sleeps. So it's a splendid three-faced doll. We call them three-faced dolls. It's by Karl Bergner of Sonnenberg, Germany, southern Germany. They're very sought after. I'm holding these sleeves up because I think they're a little bit long. I think it's probably one of your christening gowns. Yes. It would have had probably a white dress on it, and it would have had a rather nice frilly bonnet. The great thing about these were that, although they made a lot of them, there aren't that many around. They are sought after, and on a good day in a sale, it would fetch somewhere between 700 and 900.
Would it?
It's a stirrup cup. Now, this one should date from the... Yes, here we are. Yes, we're in the middle years again of the 19th century. And the maker there, that's... the maker's mark's only partially showing, in fact. We've got a crown, I can just see the eye. The quality of the work that we've got here, with that mark, I'm sure that must be Hunt and Roskell. And this is absolutely the sort of piece that Hunt and Roskell would have produced. Because as a firm, they're fascinating because they actually go back to Paul Storr, who, of course, is one of the most famous of all English goldsmiths. And gilded inside. And, of course, these are very collectible. The sort of value, gosh, for this one, I would suggest you think in terms of about £10,000. What else have we got in there?
A bit flabbergasted by that.
Another box.
Let's go small again, yeah, another little box, yeah.
Gosh, that is a very rare box. 3-compartment snuff box. It's beautiful just looking at it like that. The effect.
Very well crafted, isn't it?
Superb. No maker's marks on it. Again, would be more. It's almost too much to ask that you have a maker's mark as well, but it doesn't matter. I mean, that is a fabulous box. The mouldings around there, absolutely super. And these scenes, various gentlemen in 18th century dress. Date of it, of course, about 1740. No marks, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, this absolutely screams at you that it is the most wonderful mid-18th century box. Tricky one on value. I would have said somewhere around £3,000. Could be more.
What else have you got? Now, this watercolor sketch is a view of Monte Generoso, which is above San Remo. And it's done, as you see, in August the 9th, 1878. So here was Edward Lear staying in the place he'd found to stay and rest, the place he loved, probably getting up early in the morning, walking up to the top of the mountain, waiting for the dawn to come over the mountain, and sitting down and doing this sketch. And you could say, well, where's the color? But then I could say, well, look at the calligraphy. Look at the way his hand puts in the lines. And he's just doing this, and then he puts in color notes. And we can see in the foreground he's got the dark blue gentians, the paler blue Canterbury bells, the peonies and the clover. And then you can look down into the valley, and it doesn't say anything here, but you can see deep shadow into mist. And suddenly you could be sitting there on that mountaintop, and you can smell the mist coming up. And he has this wonderful shorthand. Up here, you see dark, vast rocks, ROX, which is, you know, charming and sweet. And above it, there is dark grey, DK, GY, and then a number, 207 or 204 or something, which will be the number. So he's exactly seen the colour, which he's going to match up to his palette later on. And you can just see him sitting there, waiting for the right colours to come up over the mountain, and then recording them like this. And with the scene in his mind and the sketch, he would go and finish the complete picture, maybe much later. But he's a favourite artist of many of us for that reason. Is it a family picture?
Well, it belongs to a friend of an aunt, so just out of interest, really. Brought it in today.
Well, I'm very pleased you did, for obvious reasons. He's getting more and more popular. He's always been popular for his watercolours and sketches. This is a jolly good big view, and I think would make about £8,000.
Good grief. That's most unexpected. Totally unexpected.
These are known as thistle cups from the shape.
Right.
These were mostly produced at the end of the 17th, early 18th century. And, oh gosh, yes, that's even better. The mark just there is actually for Glasgow.
Right, it's very faint, isn't it?
Very faint. It's actually a tree. There's a salmon across the trunk. There's a bird sitting on top of it, and there's a bell. I mean, there's this
You can see all that just in there.
Well,
you know this.
I know what the mark should be like, and I can see part of the mark. And we've got the date letter S, and that's actually for Glasgow, 1698. Right? And the maker, WC, that's William Clark of Glasgow. Your father really did have the most wonderful eye.
Took a long time.
But then the best collections are like that.
They're built slowly, I think.
Built slowly, just getting choice items all the time. Not being a magpie. So, rare, Glasgow, which is rare at this sort of period. Value-wise, we're looking there at about £5,000. Right, what else?
I don't know that I'd be able to drink out of it now that you've said this. Right, now this one.
Oh, gosh. Oh, now do you know what this is?
I wouldn't like to hazard a guess.
I'm not surprised. Pieces like this can be jolly difficult. I think this could be an early wine taster. Now, this decoration, it's where they've actually punched. They get a thing looking a little bit like a nail, and this is full of pitch inside, and they literally just hammer the decoration onto the surface. This is going to be early 17th century. Let's have a look and see. Oh gosh, yes. We're 1607 in this case, so that's King James I. Now that is exceptionally rare.
It's a bit old, isn't it?
English wine tasters are rare, and I mean, if you find an 18th century one, that's quite something.
Yeah, right.
If you find a late 17th century one, you get very excited. At auction, people would fight for it.
Right.
It's the sort of thing when it comes up for sale, it's perhaps going to be the only chance as a collector that you're ever going to have to acquire it. Very difficult piece to put a value on. It's in superb condition. And if it is an early wine taster, then it's going to be very valuable. I would say one should be thinking in terms of, what, at least 12 to 15,000 pounds.
Okay. There's something, it just doesn't seem worth it for something so small.
I think I'm probably right in saying there are about 1 or 2 known to exist.
There's 3 now.
Right.
When we start at 7. Don't I know you?
Yes. I
How's
commute
that?
on the same train as
We're
you.
on the same train together?
Yeah, every day.
Aside from that,
Yeah.
do you know what it is?
Yes, it's a Russian teacup and saucer.
Well, this is revolutionary China. After the revolution, the factories in Moscow really started to go into most extraordinary, wild production of the most fantastic contemporary designs. And this is an absolutely magical example. I love the saucer just with that mixture of black and gold. And they've tooled the gold, so you've got a mixture of shiny gold and matte. When this came out of the kiln, it was all matte. And to be shiny, gilding then has to be burnished. And they burnished it just in patches to produce this pattern, which is actually quite Art Deco in style.
Yes.
They used to polish it actually either with a hobnail from a boot or a dog's tooth. Quite extraordinary. But this is the magical bit. I mean, this is just fantastic. This nude lying down here, cuddling, I don't know what's it supposed to be? We've got on the bottom the green mark of the Russian porcelain of the period. We've got a pattern number, and this 1923 is actually the date. Really wonderful thing. I adore it. And rare. Oh, yes. 600 to 800 pounds.
Oh, my God.
Very, very nice.
That's got to be York, if it's not Scandinavian.
Right.
The form is Scandinavian. This very rounded form that you find, but typical of York at this sort of period. Well, sort of period, any idea for this one?
1600 maybe? Mark would say a date, yeah?
Well, that mark is the York mark, which looks really like a plate of spaghetti. It's one of the most impossible marks to actually, you've really got to know what you're looking at to identify that.
Yeah.
The early mark of York, the 17th century and earlier mark, is actually half a fleur-de-lis and half a leopard's head joined together. Date letter there is, that's a script K. And in fact, this one is 1664. And the maker, that's the other way up, that's William Maskell, who actually started, he got his freedom in 1664, so this must have been one of the first pieces
a celebrated piece, yeah.
So, a York tankard of this form, value, I think there we're looking at 15 to 20,000 pounds.
Oops. We'll better get some insurance next, I think.
Ooh. Right. Yes. This tankard is of a very early form. If you go right back into the early part of the 17th century, tankards are a little bit taller than this and have an absolutely flat lid.
Right.
Then, around the time of the Civil War, 1640s, the height is reduced, and you start to get this step in the lid. And that's known as a single step tankard.
Right, just because it's...
Because of that single step in the lid. Right. And this skirt, that's known as the skirt, is again typical of the earlier part of the 17th century, first half into the middle years of the 17th century. We can only actually see the beginning of the maker's mark.
Almost like it wasn't stamped hard enough.
It's not that he hasn't stamped it hard enough, he's gone in at a slight angle.
All right, so not all of it is...
Right, so it's not all showing. In fact, I do recognise that maker's mark, and the other letter is an S, which we can't actually see there.
Right.
Then again, it's London, with the leopard's head, and the lion passon, of course, there. Now, the date letter, in this case, it's for 1654. Now, that is great, because this, of course, is in the Commonwealth period. And amongst the most desirable of silver to find today is Commonwealth silver.
Yeah.
Generally, as we've got it here, often one will find it intensely plain. Not actually because of the Puritans. A lot of people say that Commonwealth silver was plain because of the Puritans. What it really was down to was that they, because of the Civil War, had gone out of the way of spending money on decoration.
Yeah.
It's a lovely size as well. On the smaller size, which is good, actually. That makes it more desirable. Value of this one, I would suggest, if you're going to insure this, certainly to think in terms of somewhere around 30 to 40,000 pounds.
I can't afford that much insurance, but I think we'll have to somehow.
That is the most wonderful piece.
Well, I'm glad you know what you're on about, as it were.
It has been wonderful for me just to see these marvellous pieces.
Certainly that one.
Absolutely. What a collection. I mean, full marks to your father. He obviously was a great connoisseur.
And here are still more items from that same collection. And I must say how marvellous it is not only to see the finest collection of silver we've ever found on an Antiques Roadshow in 16 years, but to prove yet again the programme's amazing capacity to produce the unexpected. Who would have thought that we would find all this in our visit to Crawley today? So it really has made a wonderful programme for us. Next week, we're north of the border. We're taking the Antiques Roadshow to Scotland, and I very much hope that you will join us then. Until then, from everyone here in West Sussex, goodbye.